launched 9 human missions to the moon, 6 of which successfully touched down, allowing 12 men to walk on the lunar surface. NASA's next chapter of lunar exploration, called Artemis, has the task of not just going to the moon to create a long-term human presence on and around it, but also to prepare for ever more complex human missions to Mars. In short, everything we must be able to do here, we must first do here. What will an Artemis mission look like? Everything is designed and tested with our most important element in mind, the astronauts. This is their deep space, human-rated spacecraft called Orion, built in 3 parts. The crew module, where up to 4 astronauts will live and work throughout the flight. The service module, with life support systems for the crew and its own engine and fuel reserves. And a launch abort system, with engines capable of pulling the crew module to safety during launch should anything go wrong. To accomplish the task of launching our crew and heavy payloads, NASA is building the Space Launch System, comprising of a cargo hold, an exploration upper stage, a massive core stage, and 2 extended solid rocket boosters. Altogether, this is the world's most powerful rocket, and it seats the legendary Saturn V of the Apollo era in lunar space. Sitting on the launch pad, the entire rocket, fully fueled, weighs just over 6 million pounds, 5.2 million of which is just the fuel. Once ignited, there is no stopping what comes next. All 4 RS-25 engines and the 2 solid rocket boosters come to life, thundering our crew upwards. 2 minutes after ignition, the solid rocket boosters are spent and released. 8 minutes after launch, the core stage is depleted and separated. The upper stage fires briefly, placing Orion into a parking orbit around the Earth. Here, the crew reconfigure the spacecraft and check systems to confirm everything is ready for deep space travel. With a go from mission control, the crew reignite the exploration upper stage engines to leave Earth entirely. The exact timing of this maneuver is critical to reach a speed that can escape Earth's gravitational pull, but also put Orion on a course that will intersect the moon days later. Once this burn is complete, the upper stage of the SLS is jettisoned, and the crew aboard Orion coast for several days toward all that awaits them at the moon. Approaching the moon, we see the fundamental differences between Artemis and Apollo. Instead of requiring Orion to serve as an expendable lunar command module or to carry a constrained lunar lander, the Artemis missions will take advantage of a different approach: pre-staging. Everything needed for lunar missions will be positioned in advance by commercial and international partners. This includes rovers, science experiments, and human-rated systems on the surface. But it also includes a dedicated lunar station in orbit around the moon called Gateway. Here at this station, we can pre-stage a robust lunar lander and establish a strong communications relay. Designed with open standards, Gateway can be expanded as new missions and partnerships develop, allowing multiple human missions on the moon at the same time, and enabling ongoing science to be conducted even between human missions. The Gateway is also capable of adjusting its orbit to allow access to every part of the moon, something the Apollo missions cannot. But the real key in this approach is placing Gateway in a unique halo orbit to perfect the maneuvers needed for Mars missions. And with the growing list of commercial and international opportunities, Gateway is the ideal hub between Earth and all that lies behind. Returning to our crew as they approach Gateway, the Orion must match the elliptical orbit of the station in order to successfully dock. Once on board, pre-selected crew members transfer to the lunar landers, while those assigned to Gateway remain on station. The lunar lander system itself is built for 3 unique steps: descending from the halo orbit of Gateway down to a low lunar orbit, descending from low lunar orbit to the surface, and once the lunar mission is complete, launching from the surface of the moon and returning all the way back to the orbit of Gateway. Once back aboard the Orion spacecraft and undocked from Gateway, the crew fire their engine once to break out of the halo orbit, and once again to fling the spacecraft around the moon, placing it on a multi-day trajectory back towards Earth. As they near the end of this journey, the service module is released, and the crew module is oriented heat shield first. Entering Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, the friction of air slows Orion considerably, while also subjecting it to temperatures of 5,000 degrees. With the Orion now at just 300 miles per hour, a series of parachutes uniquely tested and produced for this moment deploy, decelerating the craft to just 20 per hour for splashdown. With each successful mission, Artemis ushers in the next wave of men and women to explore our moon and prove that together we are ready to go beyond.
Now I shall bring up the PowerPoint again.
Wow, that was fantastic. I hope everyone else enjoyed that as well. So I was just going to run through a couple of things, David, very briefly, just as you bring up the PowerPoint, if that's okay.
Sure thing.
Excellent. So many thanks, everyone, to joining us in this month's meeting of the Space Meetup or Community of Interest. This is intended for anyone interested in creating a space ecosystem and community in New Zealand in light of a growing resurgence in space technologies and capabilities. We're looking for like-minded enthusiasts, and no space background is required. We're looking to set up a number of informal gatherings to share ideas, networking, and potentially collaborate in the future, as inspired by some of the other meetups in Auckland and Christchurch. A big shout out to Spacebase. Many thanks for your ongoing resourcing and support during this. Spacebase, Emmeline and Eric Dahlstrom are two. I could do the introduction, or I'll keep going if that's okay. Two Edmund Hillary Fellows who founded Spacebase, a social enterprise dedicated to catalyzing the space industry in New Zealand. Global nomads, well, not so much. Not anymore, regretfully, but we welcome you. With over 50 years combined space-related work experience in the global private and government space industry. Many thanks for letting us beg, borrow, and steal your resourcing over the last year. Just a quick rules of engagement. There's a Q&A at the end of this session. You are totally welcome to ask your questions via the chat function, and I'll set those up. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. David, is it Maclennan?
Yep.
Excellent. Who has been lecturing and writing about space exploration for over 4 decades, since high school, in fact. David is a founder and twice former president of the NZ Spaceflight Association, New Zealand's main space interest group, which ran from 1977 to 2013. Also a former editor of the association's journal Liftoff for a number of years. When he's not being a superhero at night, by day, he works for the IRD and has a number of other interests, including aviation, Egyptology, and music. David, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Well, you just saw that zippy little video from NASA, which painted a fairly rosy picture of the Artemis mission. Things might not be quite as we saw in that video, though, but we will get to that in a moment. It'll be the third attempt by NASA to return to the moon since the end of the Apollo missions. There was the ill-fated Space Exploration Initiative of the first Bush presidency. And then more recently, under George W. Bush, there was the Constellation program, which was killed off once the Obama administration came into power. So once again, we are setting our sights on the moon again with Artemis. Artemis, of course, was the sister of Apollo in ancient mythology. And as is going to be a mission to land not just the next man on the moon, but the first woman on the moon, it is a fitting name for the program.
Just an FYI, David, we're not seeing your presentation.
You're not? Oh, it says I'm screen sharing.
You might be on the wrong screen. Is anyone? Okay. Is it just me?
I'm the same. Yes, just your browser.
Oh, I see what I've done wrong. Hang on.
Yeah, I think you're just on different.
Yeah, got it. This is the first time I've ever had to do something like this, so you'll have to excuse the occasional glitch. Now,
you're doing great. We appreciate it.
I'll back it up. No, that's the one we want. So can you see
There
it?
we are.
There we go.
Nice.
Right. Okay. This is basically gives a brief overview. They're targeting, unlike the Apollo missions, which tended to go to equatorial or slightly north of the equator sites, they're aiming for the lunar south pole for this one, around nearest a crater called Shackleton. The reason for that is that robotic lunar orbiters have discovered that there are deposits of water ice in the permanently shadowed craters like Shackleton, and if that's the case, then it would be a good location for a future lunar base, because water is an essential item, of course. So there's going to be several missions. First, a dummy run of the spacecraft itself, just an uncrewed mission. Then well, not exactly an orbital mission, it's going to be a fly around the moon mission, and then for the third Artemis mission, it'll be the landing, and then later on there'll be later missions and slowly building up some infrastructure. We'll start by looking at some of the elements. The first off is, of course, the Orion spacecraft. This has actually been in development now for about 10 years. It's a hangover from the Constellation program of George W. Bush's presidency. They've gone back to the old Apollo style cone shape for the spacecraft, but all similarities end there. This is in every respect a 21st century spacecraft. Unlike Apollo, which was powered by fuel cells, this one is solar powered, with as you can see there from the solar arrays at the back. This is a comparison in sizes. The Orion spacecraft is somewhat larger than Apollo, and you can see the comparison with the other two commercial crew spacecraft, Dragon and the Boeing Starliner, as it's now called, the CST-100. The configurations of those two have changed slightly since this graphic was done some years ago. But it gives you the idea of the relative sizes anyway. So it's a bigger spacecraft, as you saw in the video. It's capable of carrying up to 4 astronauts. It's got radiation hardened electronics and computers. It's got, of course, the heat shield, life support system, power and propulsion is supplied by the European Space Agency. And it can sustain a crew for up to 3 weeks and can be docked up at the Gateway station, which you saw in the video there, for up to 6 months or more. The service module at the back there is supplied by the European Space Agency. It's actually based on one of their unmanned freighter craft that they used to send up to the International Space Station. It's solar powered, as opposed to the fuel cells, as I said. And it's the one bit that is discarded of the Orion spacecraft before it actually re-enters the atmosphere to come back to Earth. It's going to splash down just like they did in the old days. This is actually a photo of the first Orion, which was launched back in 2014, actually, on a test flight atop a Delta III rocket. It was really more or less a boilerplate spacecraft, but they were just testing the thermal protection system, which is actually similar to that used on the space shuttle. It uses it's not an ablative system like they had on Apollo, but it has the similar sort of tile system they had on the shuttle. And here is the heat shield, gives you an idea of the diameter of the thing. I think that's the heat shield for the one we just saw in the picture there. I'm not sure if that's the one that's for the actual first mission. The rather sparse captions on the NASA website didn't say. This is the first Orion as it appears today. You can get an idea of the size of the thing by the people standing around the bottom of it there. This is attached to the first service module delivered from Europe, and the cone-shaped adapter, which will fit it then to the top of the launch system. And the launch system itself is frankly a disappointingly old-fashioned system. It's basically based on shuttle-era technology, and with a few improvements. But it's going to be a throwaway rocket. They're not. It's none of it. Despite the fact that things like the shuttle boosters and so forth are reusable, for the Artemis program, nothing is going to be reusable. This thing is going to be $3 billion dumped into the ocean every time they launch one. This is a exploded view. You've got the 2 solid rocket boosters, the core stage, the engines at the back, which are the main engines and the solid rocket boosters are basically shuttle leftovers. and once they run out of those, they'll have to make some more. Then you've got the adapter and the crew vehicle up the top there. This is the interim upper stage. It's actually based, it's actually a similar technology to that on the Centaur upper stage. It's using RL-10 engines for the interim one. There will be a more powerful exploration upper stage, as they're calling it, developed for later missions. But for the first flight, they're going to be just using this interim upper stage, as they're calling it. As you get an idea from the size of it for the two guys standing there. So it's a big rocket, not much shorter than a Saturn V, and you can see it there in that diagram compared to the Saturn V, the Space Shuttle, and the Statue of Liberty. It's a good deal more powerful, 8.8 million pounds of thrust versus 7.5 for the Saturn V and 7.8 for the Shuttle. It says there that the SLS will launch more cargo to the moon than the Space Shuttle could send to low Earth orbit, which is a kind of, doesn't really mean anything, because a lot of what went into orbit with the shuttle was kind of dead weight, really, like the three engines at the back and the wings. They weren't really counted as payload as such, but you needed the three engines to get into orbit, and of course you needed the wings to get back. So it's a bit of a funny figure, that one. It can certainly put a lot of payload up there, greater than 27 tons to the moon, and compared to, say, 22 tons that the Space Shuttle could carry into low Earth orbit. The core stage is liquid fueled, of course, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It's the same diameter as the shuttle external tank, so they're able to reuse the jigs that they used to manufacture the shuttle external tanks to build the core stage of the SLS. As an exploded view of it, you've got the main liquid hydrogen tank, the liquid oxygen tank, the forward skirt, the center section, and the engine section at the back. Takes 733,000 gallons of propellant to fill the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks together. Reaches Mach 23 in just 8.5 minutes. All that usual gee whiz data. Bigger tanks, bolder missions, yes. These are the four engines that are going to be used for the first SLS launch. They're all leftovers from the shuttle. As you can see, there's a bit of wear and tear on them there. But they've all been refurbished and actually slightly tweaked in performance compared to the shuttle ones. The one in the foreground there, 2045, is the most used one. It was launched on 12 different shuttle flights, according to the little box there. They've got a supply of about 16 of these leftover shuttle engines, which will take care of the first 4 missions of the SLS. After that, they'll be building new ones. All of the first 4, all of them have been reused at least once or more. The ones on the first launch, one of them's flown 12 flights, the others have flown 6, 4, and 3, as you can see. They provide together 2 million pounds of thrust on that launch, and the rest of the thrust is provided by the solid rocket boosters. Here's the first stage, first completed stage, about to be loaded onto a barge and trucked over to the Stennis Space Center in Louisiana, where it has then been hoisted into this large test stand for a full duration firing of all the engines. This is known as the green run. There was some talk some time back about whether they needed to do the green run because it's going to add to the schedule and so forth, but the advice from the advisory boards and things are that yes, you've really got to do a green run. This is a brand new rocket. Hasn't been launched before, so you want to give it a thorough test. So that'll be happening, I believe, by the end of this year, the first full stage firing, and then it'll be shipped back to the Cape to be assembled in the vehicle assembly building for the first launch, which is due later in late next year. The solid rocket boosters, they're basically the same as the shuttle ones, except they've added a 5th segment. Unlike the shuttle ones, they're not going to recover them. I assume that's probably due to the fact that the extra booster segment that they've added adds to the weight, and therefore you'd need bigger parachutes, and of course that adds to the weight and therefore reduces the amount of payload you can carry. So unlike the shuttle, these ones are not going to be recovered, they're just going to be dumped in the ocean. They're pretty powerful, maximum thrust of 3.6 million pounds. They churn through 6 tons of solid propellant every second. So they're pretty impressive. Anyone who's ever seen a shuttle launch will know that it's a very spectacular sight to see. And the launch of an SLS is going to look very much like a shuttle launch in terms of sight and sound, because it's the same technology, more or less. They recently, early last month, it's early September, they gave the first test firing of one of these boosters, the Morton Thiokol company that makes them. So that's the first full test of a full 5-segment booster. So that's an important milestone towards the first launch. And also a while back, they tested the launch escape system by launching a mock-up Orion spacecraft atop a little stage there to test the escape tower system. They've gone back to the old system like they had on Apollo and the Mercury spacecraft, which is kind of a tractor system. If something goes wrong during launch, that just yanks the spacecraft clear, and the crew then just parachute back to the ocean, hopefully safe and sound. The Russians also use a similar system, and in fact had to use it not that long ago, if you recall. The SLS will be able to be evolved into larger vehicles. The SLS Block 1, which is the one they're going to be launching first, that can be expanded with the exploration upper stage for the Block 1B version, and eventually they'll replace the solid boosters with what they're just calling at this stage evolved boosters. They haven't decided yet whether they'll be solid or liquid fueled, but that'll be somewhat further down the track, as well as launching the Orion missions, the Artemis missions. They'll be able to use it for deep space missions. For example, the probe that they want to launch to Europa will require an SLS launch. So there's quite a bit of growth potential in the vehicle. And of course, as well as the rocket itself, they're reshaping the facilities at the Kennedy Space Center. This is looking upwards in High Bay 1 in the Vehicle Assembly Building. You can see the cutout areas there for the booster and the tank. If you've ever been inside that building, you'll know it's fairly impressive in size. I was lucky enough to go in there once when there was a fully stacked space shuttle waiting to be rolled out. And it's one thing looking up from down below, but getting right up to the top of the thing there, about where that orange thing is in the middle there, and looking down on it was quite a sight. This is an artist's impression of the SLS inside that high bay there, with the spacecraft being lowered onto the top there. And mission control is also being upgraded. This is a far cry from the old Apollo style one. It's all flat screens now. One thing about the SLS, though, I have to say, I find it a depressingly old-fashioned rocket, and as I said, it's all throwaway. It's $3 billion per launch, and they're just going to dump the thing in the ocean, which it just seems so 20th century to me. I suspect that if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos get their heavy lift launches off the drawing board and into production, the SLS may have a relatively short service life. They're also going to develop new spacesuits. This is a couple of prototype ones. The orange one is the one they would wear during the launch and re-entry periods, and the one on the left there would be the kind of suit they might have for the actual lunar explorations. It's still in the early stages yet for suit design, but a key thing is that they'll need to be more flexible than the old Apollo suits, where you've probably seen all those pictures of the astronauts bumbling around on the moon, sometimes falling over, and there wasn't a lot of maneuverability, and it was very hard. A lot of the astronauts had blackened fingertips after that, just because it was very hard to bend your fingers and pick things up. So newer and more flexible suits are going to be essential for long-term use, not just on the moon, but also on Mars, if they ever get there. Now, as well as the the Orion missions itself, there's also commercial lunar payload services. This is a program that was established in 2018 to encourage the US commercial space industry to introduce new lander technologies to develop both NASA payloads and commercial payloads to the surface. So they're planning to send science and technology experiments on missions like this about twice a year, starting next year. There's about 14 providers currently enrolled in the CLPS program on contract, and they're all eligible to bid on payload deliveries to the surface. This one we see here is a recently announced one from Maston Space Systems in California. It's a little lander they're calling the XL1. It's going to deliver and operate 8 payloads to the moon, and among these will be experiments to assess the composition of the surface, testing precision landing technologies, and also evaluating the radiation environment on the moon. There was a thing you may have seen in the space news, if you keep up as I do. Findings from the Chinese landers have indicated that the radiation environment on the moon is 2.6 times greater than that experienced on the International Space Station. So radiation is going to be one of the real well, I won't say a showstopper, but it's going to be one of the most important things they're going to have to address for long-term human exploration, not just of the moon, but also of Mars, because some sort of shielding or radiation retardant technologies are going to be very important to develop. It wasn't really a problem on Apollo because they were only there for like a week or a few days at a time. The missions only lasted, I think the longest one was about 12 days. So it wasn't really an issue back there, and they didn't carry dosimeters in those days to check it. But for future missions, long-term missions to the moon or to Mars, it's going to be a real issue. They reckon that on what they've currently found with this 2.6 times that of the International Space Station, that a tour of duty on the moon would have to be limited to about 2 months without some serious radiation protection. Another one in this CLPS series is a thing called Viper, the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover. This is a product of the Astrobotics company, and it's due for launch in 2023. And its job will be to, as it says there, investigate volatiles in the landing area around the Shackleton crater. This includes water and so forth. So all of these will provide a lot of pre-information or useful information before the astronauts get there. So the whole series of these is just 2 I've looked at. There's several others. If you can find out more about them on the NASA website. They've got a whole section on their website called Moon to Mars, which is crammed with information about some of these upcoming missions. They've also just published, actually in the last week or so, a very nice 74-page summary of the current state of play with the whole Artemis program. Well worth a look. It's again accessible on that web page. Now, you saw in the video there the Gateway, which is this little mini space station. At the moment, they're sort of hedging their bets on whether they'll need Gateway for the first Artemis mission or not. But the first 2 elements of it, which is the Power and Propulsion Element, PPE, and the Habitation and Logistics Outpost, or HALO, is due for a launch in 2023. But they're not sure yet whether it'll really need to be in the critical path for the first Artemis mission to land on the moon. So they're still trying to figure that one out. It's going to be in, as you saw in the video there, in this what they're calling a near rectilinear halo orbit, which is this long elongated orbit, and as well as the American supplied equipment, some of the international partners that on the International Space Station are also going to be involved. The European Space Agency, for example, is going to be providing a habitation module. Canada wants to supply advanced robotics. Of course, they're responsible for the robot arms on the shuttle and the International Space Station. The Japanese Space Agency will provide HAB module components and also logistics resupply. And just this week, Italy signed up to be a participant in the Gateway. And the Russian space agency Roscosmos has also expressed interest. So it'll be a kind of a mini international space station, if you like, in this elongated lunar orbit. Now, they didn't have an orbit like this on Apollo, so they need to test it out first. And that's going to be the responsibility. Well, first of all, that's what the Gateway will look like when it's fully completed. You've got an Orion at one end there. And the various modules. That's how they think it'll look at the moment. The configuration could change as things develop. But that's going to be in this near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO. And to sort of act as a pathfinder for that orbit, they're launching next year a satellite called Capstone, which is the Lunar Autonomous Positioning System Technology Operations Navigation Experiment, which is quite a mouthful. And this is where there is a little bit of New Zealand involvement, in a manner of speaking, because it's going to be launched by RocketLab, albeit from their new launch site on Wallops Island off the coast of Virginia, rather than the Mahia launch site. But nevertheless, there is that little New Zealand connection, however limited. Incidentally, I've been noticing on some of the news sites that I look at daily that RocketLab is routinely referred to now as an American-based company. There's no mention of the fact that it started out here in New Zealand, but I suppose that's inevitable. Anyway, the Capstone satellite, which is based on the little satellite bus that RocketLab have developed, is about the size of a microwave oven. It's going to demonstrate how to enter into and operate in this unusual near rectilinear halo orbit. So it'll validate new navigation technologies and verify the whole dynamics of that particular orbit. The orbit itself is located at a precise balance point in the relative gravities of the Earth and the Moon. So it requires very minimal energy to maintain something parked in that particular orbit. So it's an interesting concept, and I think it's going to be it can be used. Eventually, it'll come into its own, I think, when you have fully reusable landers that can just shuttle backwards and forwards from the surface of the Moon to the Gateway and back again. It'll be probably limited utility in the early missions, but later on it'll definitely come into its own. I was always a bit ambivalent when I first saw this concept laid out. I thought, well, what do they need that for? Why don't they just go straight to orbit? But the more I've looked at it, the more I think that, yeah, maybe it would be a good idea, particularly for longer term operations. This is the basic flight path for Artemis 1. The first mission will be launched sometime late next year, they hope. I wouldn't be surprised if it slips, though. And that'll be just an uncrewed mission to go into lunar orbit and just test out the Orion itself in a deep space environment. That'll be followed by a crew carrying mission, Artemis 2, in 2023 is the current target date. Won't go into orbit around the Moon, it'll just do a sort of figure 8, so it won't be quite a repeat of Apollo 8, but it'll nevertheless be the first time that humans will have broken free of Earth's gravity since December 1972, so it'll be a significant mission for that reason alone. And then there is the human landing systems. Now, earlier this year, NASA issued study contracts to 3 companies to come up with concepts for the new lunar module, if you like. One of these awards went to Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos's company, what they're calling the Integrated Lander Vehicle. It's fairly complicated, and it's a 3-stage vehicle. There's a descent stage supplied by Blue Origin itself, an ascent stage, which is going to be supplied by one of their partners, Lockheed Martin, and then a transfer vehicle supplied by the Northrop Grumman Corporation. Now, Grumman, of course, are the only company that actually has built a real live lunar lander, the Apollo lunar module, so that may give them a bit of an edge in the competition, I don't know. They're going to be launching, their proposal is to launch this vehicle on either Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket or United Launch Alliance's Vulcan heavy lifter. I should point out that neither of these rockets actually exist yet. They're still on the drawing board. Another company called Dynetics has come up with a single element lander providing both descent and ascent capabilities in one, and it's, as you can see, solar powered by these retractable solar arrays. The crew cabin is set fairly low on the surface, so the crew don't have to climb as high as they did on, if you go back to the previous one there, you can see the crew cabin's right at the top there, so there's a ladder going all the way up the side, so a little bit more of a climb. They'll be launching multiple modular propellant vehicles. They're going to be pre-positioned to fuel the engines at different points in the mission. So there might be some on the surface, some in orbit. It's a little bit, so it's going to require a little bit of rendezvous and docking type things. It's an unusual concept, but there you go. And the third one that they let some study contracts to, of course, was SpaceX with their Starship concept. Now that's a bit of a, I don't think Starship's got a dog show of getting the contract for the early missions, but I think NASA is was putting some investment into the future there, because if they do develop, if SpaceX do develop this vehicle, and they certainly seem very determined to do so, that could be used on later missions. Although I must admit that backing something the size of that thing down onto the moon might be a fairly tricky maneuver. So that's the lander systems. Now, one thing they won't have, despite what it said in the video, at least for the first mission, is mobility. This, of course, is the Apollo lunar rover. This one is Apollo 15s. They won't have that on the, at least not on the first mission. Maybe some of the subsequent missions may well have some sort of rover capability. NASA has certainly been looking at rover concepts for some time now. They've got this little prototype they've been testing, which is a fully pressurized little mini spacecraft on wheels. And the interesting thing is the spacesuits are mounted on the back of the thing, and they just climb into the spacesuits through a hatch on the inside the vehicle. The advantage of that is you're not dragging lunar dirt inside the cabin. Everything's kept outside, so that's an interesting concept. The Russian spacesuits, of course, are rear entry ones as well, but this would be an interesting concept. This would be more for much later on, or for eventual missions to Mars. And they've also come up with a new toilet. This is something that will be dear to the heart of any of the Apollo astronauts who had to do it the old-fashioned way with sticky back paper plastic bags. But they're launching this new universal waste management system. I think they're actually launching it up to the International Space Station fairly shortly, but they'll be able to use that for future missions to the moon and beyond. And eventually, of course, if things are sustained, there'll be a need for some sort of lunar bases. This is a European Space Agency concept for a lunar base that's done by 3D printing components from lunar soil. You can see the little digger on the left there. They've got the base covered in lunar regolith there, which would be one way of protecting from the radiation exposure. But so that's just a concept at this stage. But eventually, if things follow through, there will be hopefully permanent bases, probably more akin to bases in the Antarctic or so forth. I don't think there'll be thousands of people living on the moon or anything like that, but it will be a precursor for eventually going beyond to, of course, the next logical target beyond, which is Mars. Now, I don't think personally that humans will be going anywhere near Mars this side of mid-century based on current fiscal and policy settings. Unless, of course, Elon Musk and his Starship come up with, get operational. Although I rather think that even going a full-scale Martian mission might be a bit much even for his piggy bank. But we will have to wait and see on that. But anyway, that is the next logical step. But I think personally, I think that Mars missions, human Mars missions, are still some decades away. Now, of course, there is the question of funding. No bucks, no Buck Rogers is the rule. NASA has requested $3.2 billion for the human landing systems that we looked at before for the fiscal 2021 appropriations bill. The House Appropriations Committee, however, has only given them $628 million, and the Senate Appropriations Committee is not looking like it's going to be much more generous. Now, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine says that they need the full $3.2 billion requested for fiscal year 21 by March 21 to meet the 2024 target date. The total Artemis program, at least through from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 25, is costed at $28 billion, of which $16 billion is for the human landing systems alone. So what are the chances of them getting to the moon by 2024? I would say pretty slim. There is an election coming up this year. Even if the current administration gets returned, which many would hope not, there's no guarantee that the kind of money they need to do this in that kind of time frame at all. It was just a number that the Vice President Mike Pence pulled out of a hat. When it was announced last year, I thought, God, that's ridiculous. They're never going to do it. And there's certainly, I honestly can't see them doing it on looking like the current mood of the Senate and the House for funding. I just don't think it's going to happen by 2024. And if there's a change of administration, then all bets are off. Although I don't think the mission, the program would be cancelled outright. I think it's too far along now. We've got the rocket nearly ready for flight. The Orion spacecraft is nearly ready to go. I think that they would continue. And there is apparently in the Democrat sort of manifesto for this election a one-liner saying that they do support the Artemis program. But I do think it would be delayed. I would be very surprised, in fact, if they didn't go back to the NASA's original notional target date for returning to the moon, which would be about 2028. Because the long pole in the tent is going to be the human landing systems. You're asking them to develop a fully human-rated lunar lander in less than 4 years. I really can't see it happening. It took a lot longer with Apollo. Of course, they've got a bit more experience under their belt now, but I really have my doubts as to whether they would be able to do that within that kind of time frame. But we will have to wait and see. I certainly hope. I'm really looking forward to seeing live high-definition television from the surface of the moon rather than the grainy old black and white stuff we used to see from Apollo. I'll certainly hope I live long enough to see them at least get to the moon. I'm not sure I'll live long enough to see them get to Mars, but it would be just nice to see the moon back in focus again and some serious development there, as opposed to just boring a hole in Earth orbit as we've been doing for the last 40 or 50 years. And as I said, they are aiming to go to Mars beyond that, and so a lot of what they do on the moon, they'll be able to test out so much of the technology, things like rovers, habitats, exploration technologies in general, vehicles, all that sort of thing. You can test it out on the moon because the environments are not that different in a lot of fundamental ways. They're both low gravity worlds where you can't breathe the air. Well, the moon doesn't have any, of course. Mars has a carbon dioxide atmosphere, so you're going to need spacesuits. So you're going to have to test them. You're going to need rovers. You're going to do all the kind of technology that you're going to need for Mars. Can be tested first a little closer to home. So I think it's going to be a good contribution to when we do get to Mars, whenever that may be. So will it happen by 2024? I have my doubts, but it will happen. As I think the old hair shampoo ads with Rachel Hunter said, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. And that's that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Now, I'd like just a shout out to everyone. If you could type in your questions into the chat function. I'm going to read a couple of mine that I had come up just because, well, sorry, David.
Go for it.
Awesome. You mentioned a couple of easy ones first. I'll leave some of the harder ones to some of my colleagues. Could you expand on some of the news sites you mentioned that you check daily?
Oh, things like spacedaily.com, space.com. What are some of the other ones? I'll pull up my little list of websites here and have a look.
Space
Well,
news, space flight.
yeah, spaceflight now. The ones I look at pretty much daily are things like Space News, Space Policy Online, Space.com, Spaceflight Now, of course NASA website, ESA. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them, and SpaceDaily.com, Universe Today. Yeah, there's quite a few of them.
Thank you so much. I'll put some links to that out on the Facebook and perhaps with on the meetup site as well later on, everyone. Question from Lindsay. Regarding not having all the funding, are they still going to launch some of the earlier missions? Will it just delay the overall schedule, or is there a point where this actually starts impacting the overall program?
It's hard to say. I certainly think that barring, as long as all the tests and testing and so forth come off, I think we will see the first launch of the SLS with the first Orion. It's currently targeted for late next year. I wouldn't be surprised if it slips into 2022, because that just seems to be a pattern with these sort of things. That, little snags come up, but at the moment they're aiming for late next year, and there's no reason why they can't do it. I mean, the rocket is nearly built now. They've got the core stage they're about to test. The Orion spacecraft ready to go. So yeah, I would be cautiously optimistic that they'll get it off the pad by the end of next year for that first launch, and I can't wait.
Fantastic. Although I'm betting that Emmeline and Eric have many thoughts on what it means to be one year out from launch. A mention on NASA spaceflight.com with a particularly good forum. Now,
Yep,
do you see?
That is a good one too. Yep.
Excellent. Do you see the landers being down selected to 2 or even 1?
Well, they're saying at this stage 1 or possibly 2. I would say that they won't have the money. They'll be lucky to have the money for 1, let alone 2, the way the budget situation is looking at the moment. And I don't know what my bets would be on, whether I'd bet on Blue Origin or Dynetics. Blue Origin one is slightly complicated, but they do have as one of the partners the only company that's ever built a successful human lunar lander. So that might give them a bit of an edge. I don't know, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
You mentioned your disappointment regarding some of the environmental considerations. What would you have liked to have seen?
In what sense, environmental considerations?
Oh, you mentioned, I'm sorry, that paraphrasing, how there's really not any reusable aspects.
Yeah. I mean, here we are, the third decade of the 20th century, and we're still throwing away these $3 billion rockets every time we launch them. I think we should be able to do better than that by now, which is why I'm looking forward to seeing what the likes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos come up with their new launches. Of course, at the moment, they only exist on paper, but given Musk's gung-ho attitude, and in fact, he's already testing bits of his Starship proposal, I'm hoping that they'll come up with something, because if they can get those rockets, the new Glenn and the new Armstrong and the Falcon Heavy into production and into service, I don't think you couldn't really have much justification for keeping something a $3 billion rocket that you throw away every time you launch. And I'm sure NASA would be quite happy to be a customer, as they are for SpaceX now with the new Crew Dragon spacecraft they launch into the International Space Station. I think that's the way of the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Question: does the whole scenario depend on the exploration upper stage for the SLS?
For the human missions, yes. For the initial Orion test flight, no.
Okay, fantastic. And just a last one: could the Falcon Heavy do a moon mission? Is it achievable?
Well, it could if you're talking about the one he's working on now, not the current one. Then yes, I think it would be able to, most definitely. He's building it to launch his Starship to Mars. So if you can send it to Mars, you can send it to the moon. Yeah, I would I'd be very surprised if that didn't become a very successful rocket, given his track record so far.
Fantastic. All right. So I think that is the end of our questions, everyone.
Some good questions. Thank you.
Many thanks to David. If you can find your clap icons up, we very much appreciated this discussion. We originally had David on the schedule for I want to say April of this year. Clearly something happened. Never planned for 2020, I guess. David, we are honored.
No,
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
And I hope we can all meet face to face one day.
Here's hoping, and if we ever do this again, I hope I get my camera working.